How our own mind can play tricks on us and lead us astray from the path we planned. Imagine that you decide to adopt a healthier lifestyle by setting clear goals, such as starting to exercise regularly and improving your diet. At first you are full of motivation but inexplicably find yourself putting off going to the gym. You promise yourself that you will start on Monday, but when that day arrives a feeling of tiredness or discouragement appears out of nowhere and you end up giving up. This example shows how we often set clear goals and draw up a detailed plan to achieve them but end up encountering behaviors that lead us astray. We make decisions that seem illogical. We face unexpected mental blocks and sometimes even develop physical symptoms such as headaches or fatigue that prevent us from continuing. This feeling that something is sabotaging us can be extremely frustrating, leaving us perplexed about why we never manage to achieve what we so much desire. But why does this happen? Because sometimes we destroy our own plans for no apparent reason. Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist, dedicated much of his work to exploring the unconscious, and he came to some fascinating conclusions about this phenomenon. He identified a part of our psyche that he called the shadow. Jung described the shadow as a psychological space within the unconscious where we store the unwanted aspects of our personality. In this dark place where the light of our consciousness does not penetrate, we hide those traits of ourselves that we consider unacceptable. This can happen for several reasons. Maybe our parents did not approve of these traits, or maybe they do not fit into society's standards. Or even life may have taught us that these aspects cause us suffering. So we repress these parts of ourselves, pushing them into the depths of the psyche as if they were not part of who we are. However, as Jung warns us in Ion, this repression does not solve the problem. On the contrary, it can have disastrous consequences as these repressed aspects take on a life of their own and begin to operate in the darkness outside of our conscious control. This is where self-sabotage really begins. These repressed parts of the personality rebel against our conscious mind from the depths of the shadow. Thus we end up at war with ourselves without even knowing who or what we are really fighting. Fortunately, Jung offers us a way out. Instead of repressing what is in the shadow, he suggests that we must integrate these aspects into our conscious personality. And this can only be done by bringing the unconscious to the surface, making conscious what is hidden. As Jung states in Psychological Types, consciousness easily succumbs to unconscious influences that are often truer and wiser than our conscious thinking. A great confusion that arises when we talk about the shadow is the idea that it is simply the negative side of our personality. As the shadow can cause problems, many see it as the part of us that carries all the negative impulses. And for this reason the shadow is often represented symbolically as a shadowy figure suggesting another threatening self that operates outside of our conscious perception. However, the shadow is much more than that. It is like a dark place in the human psyche where the light of consciousness does not reach. In this dark closet we lock away all the parts of our personality that we are not ready to face or reintegrate at the moment, be it because of traumas, unmet needs, or other reasons. When we talk about working with the shadow and integrating it, we are not talking about integrating the shadow itself but rather the contents it holds. These contents are the repressed aspects of our personality that inhabit this dark place. Just as we can take objects out of a dark closet and bring them into the light, we can also bring these aspects of our personality into the light of consciousness where they are no longer shadowed. Therefore, there is nothing inherently dark or negative about these aspects. The problem is that when they operate outside of our consciousness, they cause problems due to this disconnection. And it is crucial to understand that when these parts of the personality are repressed, we are not simply dealing with isolated traits. As Jung explains, unconscious motives often prevail over our conscious decisions, especially in matters of vital importance. These fragments of personality separated from consciousness are often called shadow aspects. They are like mini personalities, each of them being part of you as they are fragments of your own identity. When these mini personalities separate from consciousness and are placed in the dark closet of the shadow, they become autonomous and independent of your conscious personality, which is the ego, that is the part of you that you recognize as me. In the same way that our conscious personality or ego has its own perspectives, needs and agendas, each of the shadow aspects that inhabit the shadow also has its own perspectives, needs and agendas. And these agendas may or may not conflict with the goals of our conscious personality. By understanding and integrating these aspects, we can begin to free ourselves from cycles of self-sabotage and live more fully and consciously. This journey is essential for those seeking a deeper understanding of themselves and wishing to follow a path of self-knowledge and personal growth. When the goals of your conscious personality conflict with the goals of one of your shadow wings, it causes great internal turmoil and a sense of resistance or self-sabotage. This internal conflict can appear in behaviors of procrastination and self-sabotage that make it difficult to make positive changes in your life. Let's look at an example of how shadow-based self-sabotage can manifest in someone's life and frustrate their plans. Imagine a man who strongly identifies as a loner. His goal is to run a successful online business and live in the country because this lifestyle minimizes interaction and dependence on other people, something he consciously believes is what he wants. Although the idea of self-sufficiency is viable, he repeatedly undermines the progress he makes. For example, he receives an offer to buy a piece of land in the middle of nowhere for an affordable price but refuses with a flimsy justification. Or he manages to attract a large number of followers to his lifestyle blog that has a lot of earning potential but decides to stop posting without being able to explain his decision with solid arguments. From the point of view of the ego, how he consciously perceives himself and determines what he wants and needs, his choices seem unreasonable. After all, he strongly identifies as a self-sufficient loner. He has dreamed for years of being independent and living away from the masses. But as soon as his dreams start to come true, he puts obstacles in his way. He cannot explain why. It seems that something or someone is sabotaging his efforts. This something may be a repressed aspect of his psyche, a shadow that acts autonomously. This shadow may be linked to a deep fear of absolute loneliness or to an unconscious desire for validation that conflicts with the isolated life he consciously seeks. Even though his conscious part desires total independence, this shadow fears isolation and unconsciously seeks to avoid this scenario by sabotaging his attempts to carry out his plans. In this way, the man continues to move away from his goals, always finding rational justifications for his postponements and changes of plans. But until he faces and integrates this repressed part of himself, this fear of loneliness or desire for connection, he will continue to be trapped in a cycle of self-sabotage where his dreams will always seem unattainable despite being so close. As if an unwanted guest were hiding in the shadows of his soul, acting outside his conscious authority. Just like any attempt to find a logical explanation for his self-sabotage, this mysterious guest remains elusive. He knows something is wrong but cannot identify what it is because it is beyond his conscious reach. And until he illuminates what is hidden, it will control him like a puppeteer behind the scenes. Jungian analyst Dr. Murray Stein stated that any autonomous complex that is not subject to conscious will exert a possessive effect on consciousness proportional to its strength and limits its freedom. When our shadow aspects take control, destructive consequences can occur. Unexplained desires and emotions can appear out of nowhere without warning, supplanting our authority and weakening our willpower. They influence and even sabotage our conscious goals, pulling the strings behind the curtains and leaving us perplexed by our irrational behavior. Murray Stein wrote the following about the sabotaging nature of complexes. Complexes work to block the individuation process by pushing a person into emotional dead ends. One can easily fall victim, for example, to an unrelenting need for revenge and unrelenting anger over childhood wounds, or slide into the bottomless abyss of nostalgia. The complex has a will of its own that is often stronger than the ego's ability to resist. The complex or mini-personality hidden in this man's shadow represents a repressed characteristic, the desire for human connection. Because of past wounds, he has rejected it and he is not aware of it. This unwanted aspect of himself has transformed into a shadow government that tries to undermine the actions of a fearful isolationist masquerading as a lover of solitude and independence, but who unknowingly longs deeply for companionship. Deep within his psyche, this repressed personality plays a paradoxical game. On the one hand, this shadow aspect wants to be part of his consciousness. It wants its motivations to be heard, its desires to be felt, its needs to be met, therefore sabotaging the fierce individualism of the conscious personality and all its efforts toward independence. On the other hand, the dark aspect does not want to be illuminated. And its evasion is understandable because it not only represents what is unwanted but also rebels against the person who rejected it. If it is discovered, it will lose its sovereignty. Therefore, while it remains in the shadows, it maintains the power to troll, sabotage, and destroy autonomously. Understanding and integrating these aspects is essential to overcoming self-sabotage, as Jung emphasizes in Memoirs, Dreams, Reflections. A deeper understanding of oneself is fundamental to overcoming cycles of self-sabotage and achieving true personal growth.